Book 3, Chapter 17 of Resurrection. "What do you think of that?" said Mary Pavlovna. "In love, quite in love. Now that's a thing I never should have expected. That Valdemar Simonson should be in love, and in the silliest, most boyish manner. It is strange, and to say the truth it is sad," and she sighed. "But she, Katusha, how does she look at it, do you think?" Nekhludoff asked. She, Mary Pavlovna waited, evidently wishing to give as exact an answer as possible. She! "Well, you see, in spite of her past, she has one of the most moral natures, and such fine feelings. She loves you well, and is happy to be able to do you even the negative good of not letting you get entangled with her. Marriage with you would be a terrible fall for her, worse than all that's past, and therefore she will never consent to it. And yet your presence troubles her. Well, what am I to do? Ought I to vanish?" Mary Pavlovna smiled her sweet, childlike smile, and said, "Yes, partly." "How is one to vanish partly?" "I am talking nonsense. But as for her, I should like to tell you that she probably sees the silliness of this rapturous kind of love. He has not spoken to her, and is both flattered and afraid of it. I am not competent to judge in such affairs, you know. Still I believe that on his part it is the most ordinary man's feeling, though it is masked. He says that this love arouses his energy and is platonic, but I know that even if it is exceptional, still at the bottom it is degrading." Mary Pavlovna had wandered from the subject, having started on her favourite theme. "Well, but what am I to do?" Nekhludoff asked. "I think you should tell her everything. It is always best that everything should be clear. Have a talk with her. I shall call her. Shall I?" said Mary Pavlovna. "If you please," said Nekhludoff, and Mary Pavlovna went. A strange feeling overcame Nekhludoff when he was alone in the little room with the sleeping Vera Doukhova, listening to her soft breathing, broken now and then by moans, and to the incessant dirt that came through the two doors that separated him from the criminals. What Simonson had told him freed him from the self-imposed duty, which had seemed hard and strange to him in his weak moments, and yet now he felt something that was not merely unpleasant, but painful. He had a feeling that this offer of Simonson's destroyed the exceptional character of his sacrifice, and thereby lessened its value in his own and others' eyes. If so good a man, who was not bound to her by any kind of tie, wanted to join his fate to hers, then this sacrifice was not so great. There may also have been an admixture of ordinary jealousy. He had got so used to her love that he did not like to admit that she loved another. Then it also upset the plans he had formed of living near her while she was doing her term. If she married Simonson, his presence would be unnecessary, and he would have to form new plans. Before he had time to analyze his feelings, the loud din of the prisoners' voices came in with a rush. Something special was going on among them today, as the door opened to let Katusha in. She stepped briskly close up to him and said, "Mary Pavlovna has sent me." "Yes, I must have a talk with you. Sit down. Valdemar Simonson has been speaking to me." She sat down and folded her arms in her lap and seemed quite calm, but hardly had Nekhludoff uttered Simonson's name when she flushed crimson. "What did he say?" she asked. "He told me he wanted to marry you." Her face suddenly puckered up with pain, but she said nothing and only cast down her eyes. "He is asking for my consent or my advice. I told him that it all depends entirely on you, that you must decide." "Ah, what does it all mean? Why?" she muttered, and looked in his eyes with that peculiar squint that always strangely affected Nekhludoff. They sat silent for a few minutes, looking into each other's eyes, and this look told much to both of them. "You must decide," Nekhludoff repeated. "What am I to decide? Everything has long been decided." "No, you must decide whether you will accept Mr. Simonson's offer," said Nekhludoff. "What sort of a wife can I be? I, a convict? Why should I ruin Mr. Simonson too?" she said with a frown. "Well, but if the sentence should be mitigated—" "Oh, leave me alone. I have nothing more to say," she said, and rose to leave the room. End of Book 3, Chapter 17. Book 3, Chapter 18 of Resurrection. When, following Katusha, Nekhludoff returned to the men's room, he found everyone there in agitation. Nabatoff, who went about all over the place, and who got to know everybody and noticed everything, had just brought news which staggered them all. The news was that he had discovered a note on a wall, written by the revolutionist Petlin, who had been sentenced to hard labour and who, every one thought, had long since reached the Kara, and now it turned out that he had passed this way quite recently, the only political prisoner among criminal convicts. On the 17th of August, so ran the note, I was sent off alone with the criminals. Neveroff was with me, but hanged himself in the lunatic asylum in Kazan. I am well and in good spirits and hope for the best. All were discussing Petlin's position and the possible reasons of Neveroff's suicide. Only Kryltsov sat silent and preoccupied, his glistening eyes gazing fixedly in front of him. My husband told me that Neveroff had a vision while still in the Petropavlovsky prison, said Rintseva. Yes, he was a poet, a dreamer. This sort of people cannot stand solitary confinement, said Novodvorov. Now, I never give my imagination vent when in solitary confinement, but arranged my days most systematically, and in this way always bore it very well. What is there unbearable about it? Why, I used to be glad when they locked me up, said Nabatoff cheerfully, wishing to dispel the general depression. A fellow is afraid of everything, of being arrested himself and entangling others, and of spoiling the whole business, and then he gets locked up, and all responsibility is at an end, and he can rest, he can just sit and smoke. You know him well? Asked Mary Pavlovna, glancing anxiously at the altered, haggard expression of Kryltsov's face. Neveroff, a dreamer? Kryltsov suddenly began, panting for breath, as if he had been shouting or singing for a long time. Neveroff was a man such as the earth bears few of, as our doorkeeper used to express it. Yes, he had a nature like crystal. You could see him right through. He could not lie, he could not dissemble. Not simply thin-skinned, but with all his nerves laid bare, as if he were flayed. Yes, his was a complicated, rich nature, not such a... But where is the use of talking, he added, with a vicious frown. Shall we first educate the people, and then change the forms of life, or first change the forms, and then struggle, using peaceful propaganda or terrorism? So we go on disputing while they kill. They do not dispute, they know their business. They don't care whether dozens, hundreds of men perish, and what men. No, that the best should perish is just what they want. Yes, Herzen said that when the Decembrists were withdrawn from circulation, the average level of our society sank. I should think so indeed. Then Herzen himself and his fellows were withdrawn. Now is the turn of the Neveroffs. They can't all be got rid of, said Nabatoff in his cheerful tones. There will always be left enough to continue the breed. No, there won't, if we show any pity to them there, Nabatoff said, raising his voice, and not letting himself be interrupted. "Give me a cigarette." "Oh, Anatole, it is not good for you," said Mary Pavlovna. "Please do not smoke." "Oh, leave me alone," he said angrily, and lit a cigarette, but at once began to cough and to retch, as if he was going to be sick. Having cleared his throat, though, he went on. "What we have been doing is not the thing at all. Not to argue, but for all to unite, to destroy them, that's it." "But they are also human beings," said Nekhludoff. "No, they are not human. They who can do what they are doing. No, there now. I heard that some kind of bombs and balloons have been invented. Well, one ought to go up in such a balloon and sprinkle bombs down on them, as if they were bugs, until they were all exterminated. Yes, because—" He was going to continue, but flushing all over, he began coughing worse than before, and a stream of blood rushed from his mouth. Nabatoff ran to get ice. Mary Pavlovna brought valerian drops and offered them to him, but he, breathing quickly and heavily, pushed her away with his thin white hand and kept his eyes closed. When the ice and cold water had eased Kryltzoff a little, and he had been put to bed, Nekhludoff, having said good night to everybody, went out with a sergeant, who had been waiting for him some time. The criminals were now quiet, and most of them were asleep. Though the people were lying on and under the bed shelves and in the space between, they could not all be placed inside the rooms, and some of them lay in the passage with their sacks under their heads and covered with their cloaks. The moans and sleepy voices came through the open doors and sounded through the passage. Everywhere lay compact heaps of human beings covered with prison cloaks. Only a few men who were sitting in the bachelor's room by the light of a candle end, which they put out when they noticed the sergeant, were awake, and an old man who sat naked under the lamp in the passage, picking the vermin off his shirt. The foul air in the political prisoners' rooms seemed pure compared to the stinking closeness here. The smoking lamp shone dimly as through a mist, and it was difficult to breathe. Stepping along the passage, one had to look carefully for an empty space, and having put down one foot, had to find place for the other. 3 persons, who had evidently found no room even in the passage, lay in the ante-room, close to the stinking and leaking tub. One of these was an old idiot, whom Nekhludoff had often seen marching with the gang. Another was a boy about 12. He lay between the other 2 convicts, with his head on the leg of one of them. When he had passed out of the gate, Nekhludoff took a deep breath, and long continued to breathe in deep draughts of frosty air. End of Book 3, Chapter 18.